So thank you for being with us today in this hybrid time when there are so many options and so many ways to be connected. And we're delighted that you're here with us today this way. So yesterday, it almost goes without saying, right? This was the holiday that many individuals who identify as Christians celebrate as the birthday of baby Jesus. And we know this is almost certainly not a literal truth that December 25th was the day. And it may or may not have been a metaphorical one, and it doesn't really matter. But this idea, this holy day that follows closely on the heels of solstice, that may or may not have had historical ties to the Roman festival of Saturnalia, with its festival of light and feasting and gift giving. The Romans, being smart conquerors that they were, mostly allowed their new subjects, the conquered people, to keep their own customs, to keep their currency, to keep their local governments. And most of all, they let them keep most of their belief systems and ritual practices. It made the people easier to govern. And that was the way it was for Christianity under the Romans for a very long time, close to 300 years. But then a Roman emperor who was in a battlefield, but his name was Constantine, and Constantine was fixing to go fight some people and his troops, and he saw a sign in the sky, and he took it as a good omen before the battle that they were going to win. And he told his troops that they were fighting in honor of this new god, whatever it was, because he didn't know yet. Well, they won against a much stronger army. So Constantine figured out that he'd better figure out who this new god was, because he had been blessed by this god giving him the victory. Well, this god, in his interpretation, happened to be the Christian god. And so he was the first of the Roman emperors to become a Christian. And it was most of 80 years later when Christianity became the official state religion of the Roman Empire. So it's no wonder that this awareness of Christianity is so embedded in the Northern Hemisphere and so deeply embedded in our own collective psyche. And we know that this collective psyche, this collective unconscious, drives our behaviors if we don't choose something else. So this Christmas story resides in our minds, even if we don't necessarily buy into the whole baby Jesus thing. It's still in there because it's part of who we are as a collective whole. So I want to take a few minutes and explore the religious science viewpoint about this major Christian holiday. Dr. Daniel Lee Morgan, who was the founding minister of the Guidance Church of Religious Science in LA, wrote a book of daily readings called Guidance for a Spiritual Journey. And we sometimes use this for our daily morning practice. I did that on Saturday when it was my turn. And from Dr. Daniel, Christmas contains the promise of the visible manifestation of Christ in us, and that Jesus, whose birthday Christmas honors, was a fulfillment in us of that original spiritual I am, or Christ. Christ is the divine idea of you and me that was implanted in us from the beginning. Christ is the form of the name that we commonly apply to the man of Galilee, who demonstrated perfection to a greater degree than almost anybody ever known. Each of us has within themselves this Christ, just as Jesus did, and we must look within to recognize and realize our oneness, our divine origin and birth, even as Jesus did. This Christ, or perfect human idea, exists eternally in divine mind as the true spiritual higher self of everyone. And you can take on as much of this perfect person as you wish. You can display it, you can bring it out and put it in the forefront as you choose. Christ is the embodiment of all divine ideas: intelligence, life, love, substance, and strength. Christmas must come from within ourselves, not from the stores and markets where we buy presents. This Christ, or perfect human idea, exists eternally in divine mind as the true spiritual higher self of every individual, and is the eternal miracle ever taking place in you and in me. So I have a story that helps us remember what we can do when we forget that we are this Christ in us and as us. And it's about how we can use argumentative treatment when our momentary life experience doesn't really line up with our knowing of ourselves as emanations of the divine. But first, I need to talk about what this argumentative treatment thing is. Now, we know that there are two forms of treatment, right? There's the realization treatment where you just know and you go there and you don't have any doubts rattling around in the back of your head and saying, yeah, but what about? When you can do a straight realization treatment, you just know the truth and you go there. But what if you've got this argument in your head that says, yeah, but when we know a truth, but we're not experiencing that truth in our lives at the moment, we have a way that we can change our minds so that we can align our thinking to remembering that truth that might not be part of our present experience. That's one of the powerful teachings that's part of the science of mind practice. And we have, as practicers of this teaching, access to the tools and the technology and the awareness to make a distinction between our present moment experience, which might not be aligned with that knowing, that truth of our wholeness, and might allow us to remember how to make that shift in our consciousness to get to the truth of our being, that higher self that Dr. Daniel was talking about a minute ago. And we do the work in our own consciousness because that's the only place we have to work with. Form must follow consciousness. It doesn't have any choice. This is a basic premise of our teaching. For instance, I sprained my ankle 2 weeks ago when I was in California for 48 hours, and it really hurt. And it got all pretty and swollen and had lots of nice bruised colors. And I did all the normal stuff that you're supposed to do when you sprain your ankle: rest, ice, compression, elevation. And I reminded myself lots about the truth of how my ankle was. It is part of my whole healthy body, and it works as designed. And because form must follow consciousness, it has no choice. Form must follow consciousness. My ankle was much better after a week. We each have that ability to take our present experience that's not aligned with our higher self and turn it so that our mind gets changed. And then our body, our experience, our life has to line up with that. That's just how it works. So anytime I find myself falling in a hole where things are not behaving like I want them to, whatever that means in the moment, because we have lots of choices about that too, I can remember to grab my consciousness and say, no, come on, hang on, you know better. And each one of us has that ability. Each one of us has the tools. Each one of us has the opportunity And each one of us can get better at practicing these things, right? This is not a one and done. We are always in the practice. That's just part of what comes with being human and having human experiences. We get to reaffirm that we know the truth for ourselves and for everybody else. So I want to tell you a little bit of stuff about that I actually read from the Daily Stoic this morning. But this is about a guy. His name is Jocko Willink, and he's a retired Navy SEAL. And he explains how we can see everything that happens to us as good, even if it wasn't when it happened. So these are his words. Oh, the mission got canceled? Good. We can focus on another one. Oh, didn't get that new high-speed gear that we wanted? Good. We can keep it simple. Didn't get promoted? Good. Go out and get more experience and build a better resume. Got injured? Good. Maybe you needed a break from training. Got tapped out? Good. It's better to tap out in training than to tap out in the street. Got beat? Good. We learned something. Got unexpected problems? Good. We have a chance to figure out solutions. We each have our spiritual practices, which we can use to remind us of our intimate and personal relationship in this infinite power presence, love, peace, joy, life, which helps us realize that that's the spirit of the divine, our Christ nature, already has individualized in each of us. So even if we don't get what we want in this moment, if our lives have felt challenging at this time, and they have, right? For a lot of people, this has been a wickedly challenging period of time. There is some part of us that knows that our perfect life exists in the mind of God right now. And our perfectly in Christ itself knows this too. And if our physical experience doesn't align with that, we have the opportunity to use our practices, to use our teachings, and change our mind, turn our point of view back to where we can remember our wholeness, back to when we can remember to experience our world as our in Christ itself must see it. So we've almost arrived at the turning of the year, and we get to look back at this year that we've had and contemplate the gifts that we received and what we're looking forward to in the year that's coming. So right now, I'm going to ask you to take a conscious breath and consider for a minute this past year, what it's brought with all its ups and downs, with all its difficulties and delights, and ponder the gifts that this past year has brought you. For some of us, that might be a stretch because the year's been tough. And yet, in every experience, there is a gift. Through this past year, you may have discovered some new joy or delight. Or you may have discovered that you're stronger than you thought you could possibly be. Or that you had support from unexpected sources. Or maybe that you thought what you needed wasn't actually what you did need. Or maybe you became aware of the difficulties that were in your life and the challenges and the gifts that came from those. And truthfully, if something still feels too raw and too hurtful that you can't see the gift yet, that's okay. Because it is this life of being human that we've chosen to be here for. And we get to have the experience and trust that the gift, even if we can't see it yet, must be there And it is coming. It will become apparent. We have a saying around here that if you ever find yourself in a stable full of manure, you might as well grab a shovel, because there's bound to be a pony in there somewhere. So in every stable full of manure, there is a pony. We just have to find it, and we have to see our way to remember it. So I'm going to take us through the magic of Zoom into the breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak about your gifts that you have received from this past year. I'm going to pause the recording. You're going to be invited to join a breakout room if you've never done this before. It's not too scary. You'll have 5 or 6 minutes to share some unexpected gift that you've received, you've realized, you've recognized in this past year. And if you don't know the person or people that you're paired with, please introduce yourselves. And if you're somebody who really, really, really likes to talk, make sure the other person gets to talk first. And if you don't want to join a breakout room, you don't have to. You can stay here and talk to me. But we're going to talk about unexpected gifts too, so you might as well go into a breakout room. And when there's a minute left, you'll see a countdown clock appear, and that'll tell you that there's 60 seconds left before you come back into this big room. So I'm going to pause the recording and set up the breakout rooms. And that's how it works sometimes. Go ahead. I don't know who was talking. But anyway, thank you for playing with me. Thank you for participating in the conversation. I hope you learned stuff about seeing the experiences in the rearview mirror and seeing them and being able to see that positive reframing, because we have that choice. We have that option. And sometimes we have to dig a little bit to find that pony, because it's hiding really good. So I want to close with a short piece that I picked up off of Facebook yesterday from a local chaplain that I know. I believe he works as a hospice chaplain, but I'm not absolutely sure. His name is Adam Taylor Smith, and he's a young guy with a couple of young kids that he and his wife have, and he's lovely. And he would be what you would call a progressive Christian. So he's always building stories, regular everyday stories. And he's posting them on Facebook for other people to glean the gifts from them. And so this is what he posted yesterday. In the past year, I had this idea. What if my family and I find a shimmering star in the sky and follow it until it leads us to a newborn baby, and we offer it comforting gifts like gold and frankincense and myrrh? Christ can be as random as following a star and seeing where it leads you. And wherever it leads you, it will lead you to Christ, because Christ is that spontaneous. It's cloudy tonight, and I'm looking for a star, and there aren't any stars in the sky. Over the last week, my family and I have been studying the stars and preparing to follow the brightest star to the closest hospital in town and give 3 gifts like the Magi for the family of the baby born today. I remember that even the wise Magi had trouble locating the star at one point on their journey and eventually found their way. Earlier this week, my wife Elise purchased 3 gifts, and she went ahead and wrapped them this evening. And even though it's cloudy, we went in the direction of the last time we saw a bright star. It led west, and we traveled to the hospital where we assumed a baby had been born. I walk up to the receptionist and I say, "Merry Christmas, I'm bringing these gifts for a baby born today." And the middle-aged lady behind the desk said, "And what's the name of the baby's family?" I say, "I don't know the name." And she says, "You don't know the name? Well, how am I supposed to help you, honey?" I say, We wanted to bring 3 gifts to a baby that was born today on Christmas Day. And she says, well, then just sit there and I'll make sure they get them. And I say, well, just so you know, it's diapers and wipes and socks. Well, her eyes flood with tears and she says, you're going to make me cry. And she continues, I was born on New Year's Day. Tears are coming out from behind her mask. This touches my heart, she says. And I say, thank you for your help. Merry Christmas. And then Adam gives 2 quotes, one from the Christian New Testament and one from the apocryphal book, the Gospel of Thomas. From the book of Matthew, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did for me. And from Thomas, split a piece of wood, I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there. We live in this space of being able to see the gifts in our lives all the time. And maybe we can't see them sometimes because we don't know how to pick up the rocks and look. But we live in the space of being able to see the gifts when we choose to do it. So look for the gifts. Look for the pony. Look for that silver lining in this gray cloud. And remember, that's your in Christ itself, presenting itself to you and allowing you to share that with the wider world. Do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So I want to roll straight into the prayer. And if your conversation with your neighbor about gifts gave you some ideas of ways you could see your world a little differently, or maybe you heard yourself say something you didn't know you thought, hold this idea of reframing our experience through the eyes of our in Christ itself. In Christ itself, while I speak the words, I rest in this space. I rest in this knowing, divine mind living as me, living as each beloved here, and knowing this in Christed presence as each one. Knowing each individual I meet already is that Christ self, walking and talking and engaging, whether they know it or not. And I get to see with my own God eyes that connection, that oneness, that wholeness, that brightness in my own life and in the lives of everyone that I touch. Because each one of us already has been given automatically, without asking, without ever deserving, this Christ as us. So I celebrate this truth. I celebrate this truth for me and for all beings. Each one of us already lives as this spiritual higher self, this Christ in us and as us, living through us. And as we remember this and enact this and live this way, our world benefits. And so I rest in that. I don't have to do anything extra special or be different than who I am, because that Christ self already lives as me and already lives as everyone. So I relax into that truth and I allow it to show up, and I celebrate this opportunity to be. Relaxing into this great good, I celebrate it and I let it be. And so it is.